France, September 19th, 1944. First light struggles through a shroud of Ardennes mist. Dew clings to the hedgerows. The world smells of churned soil and gasoline. 5 American Sherman tanks idle in a narrow field, engines rumbling like restrained thunder. Inside one turret, a commander presses his headphones tighter beneath his helmet. There is no shouting, no frantic hand signals, just a steady voice in his ears, clear, calm, unmistakable. Enemy armor. Northeast, moving. Static barely exists on this net. The message cuts through the fog like a blade. Across the tree line, German tankers huddle in their Panzer foos. Their radios hiss with background noise, ignition crackle, atmospheric whine, masked words turned into guesswork. They know American armor is near, but not where, not how many, not coordinated as one. Back in the Sherman platoon, a single command jumps across frequencies. Orders ripple in seconds. Turrets traverse. Guns elevate. A tank destroyer on standby receives the same precise bearings. Before the Germans even see the Shermans, they've already been seen, already been targeted, because in this war, the first weapon to fire is often the first voice to speak, and the Americans had made sure their voices carried farther than anyone expected, even the Germans. At the dawn of the Second World War, tanks were loud, clumsy steel creatures. Their engines roared, their tracks squealed, and inside their armor the crews often fought in isolation. Each vehicle trapped in its own rattling universe of vibration and fear. Communication was a battlefield currency, rarer than armor plate, more valuable than firepower. A tank could destroy an enemy tank, but to control the battle it needed to speak and to listen. Germany's early edge in 1939 and 1940, German armored doctrine shocked the world. Blitzkrieg was more than fast tanks. It was fast communication. Most Panzer III and IV commanders had radios. They could talk with their platoon, their company, even supporting infantry. Orders moved at the speed of electricity. Tactical surprise followed. Meanwhile, many Allied tanks, especially French vehicles, relied on visual signals, flags, hand gestures, even kicking the hull to get attention. Tanks that couldn't talk fought alone, and alone they fell. The United States Army took notes. America industrializes communication as America expanded its armored forces in 1941-42. There was a clear priority: every tank, every platoon, every commander, radio-equipped. But the U.S. went further than simply issuing sets. Engineers and Signal Corps officers wanted something stronger than what Europe was using. They wanted radios resistant to interference, especially the constant ignition noise created by tank engines and electrical systems. Germany's standard sets, like the Fuji-5, operating on low-band AM, amplitude modulation, were noisy, vulnerable to atmospheric static, and easily masked by the chaos of combat. The U.S. instead pursued a different path: frequency modulation, FM. It was a relatively new technology: clear voice, reduced static, better performance in close terrain. FM didn't magically ignore the laws of physics, but compared to AM, it was a revelation. The SCR-508 family. The U.S. introduced standardized FM VHF, very high frequency. Tank radios such as the SCR-508, commander and platoon nets, and SCR-538, company and battalion nets. Installed in M4 Sherman tanks, these sets offered clean audio with far less interference, reliable performance in forests, towns, and hedgerows, rapid frequency changes for coordination, stable communication even while en route inside the tank. Every crew member had access to an interphone system. The driver could talk to the gunner. The loader could warn the commander. Voices traveled instantly through headsets, not over the roar of the engine. This wasn't just a tank. It was a network node. The American tactical philosophy WWII armored doctrine prized information flow. A platoon leader could redirect fire, call for artillery, warn flanking squads, or contact air support in moments. This flattened chain of communication encouraged initiative. A sergeant or lieutenant did not need to wait for higher command to react. German tankers, by contrast, often fought under stricter centralized control. Not all vehicles had radios. Older Panzer IV models and many assault guns relied on the commander, the only one with a transmitter, to use signal flags or hand gestures to guide subordinates. If the commander was hit, a formation could fall into silence. A silent tank is a target. A networked tank is a threat. The Sherman as a communications platform. There is a cliché about the Sherman, that it was inferior to German armor. Thinner armor, a gun that struggled against front-facing Panthers and Tigers, but the Sherman possessed something far harder to measure on paper: connectivity. Tank-to-tank coordination, armor to infantry integration, fast requests to artillery, clear links to battalion command. This let Americans shape the battlefield. Not just survive it. A Panzer might have a deadlier gun. A Sherman could control 3 guns at once, simply through communication. Training the sound of victory. By 1943, the U.S. Signal Corps trained thousands of radio operators and wire crews. Tank officers drilled radio discipline until brevity became instinct. The language of armored warfare evolved into short, clipped commands, precise, unambiguous. Examples like, Red 2, bearing 320. Fire when ready. Seconds saved meant lives saved. In after-action reports, one phrase appears repeatedly. Communication was excellent. They weren't bragging. They were reporting a weapon Europe awaits, yet equipment alone doesn't win a war. Technology must meet terrain, and the European theater was about to become a cruel proving ground. Dense hedgerows, dark forests, hidden enemy armor stalking close enough to smell the diesel fumes. Radios would determine who shot first and who didn't get to shoot at all. By early June 1944, as landing craft churned toward Normandy, the Sherman radio network sailed with them. It arrived ready to turn chaos into command, and Germany had no idea how far behind they were falling, because the true power of FM wasn't numbers on a specification sheet. It was the difference between confusion and control, a difference that would be measured in thousands of steel hulls left, burning on European soil. U.S. radios had transformed the Sherman into a battlefield communicator. Soon the war would show exactly what that meant. Normandy, June 1944. A battlefield designed by nature to break communication. The bocage, ancient hedgerows thick with earth, roots and tangled greenery, created a maze of walls and tunnels. A tank might be only 40 meters from the enemy and never see them. Lines of sight collapsed into green claustrophobia. A commander didn't just need eyes. He needed ears that extended beyond the next hedge. That is where American radios stopped being technical specifications and became survival. Fighting in fragments. U.S. tankers learned quickly that engagements often began without warning. A Sherman could be moving along a farm lane when a single 75mm round burst from a concealed German gun, the shell smashing steel and spraying red-hot fragments inside. The natural reaction was chaos, but clear communication turned chaos into action. Reports poured across FM nets. Contact right! Airburst over us! Armor hull down north! There was no time for long messages. No room for confusion. The net became the crew's sixth sense. German radio operators struggled in this same environment. Their AM sets, so powerful in open terrain, were now plagued by noise, distortion, and signal scattering among the hedgerows. A critical message could dissolve into static before reaching the next tank. In a place where the enemy could appear at arm's length, seconds mattered. And the Americans had shaved those seconds down. Combined arms choreography. The real advantage wasn't only tank-to-tank communication. It was everything-to-everything communication. U.S. armored forces were designed to work as a conversation between different branches. Infantry spotting targets hidden in brush, artillery delivering shells minutes after a call. Tank destroyers guided to intercept threats. Engineers blasting new routes through hedgerows. Air support summoned when the situation demanded it, every role connected through radio, woven together like threads in a single lethal fabric. For German defenders, the battle came in disjointed surges. A Sherman attack here, a bombardment there, infantry suddenly flanking from an unexpected orchard. To them, it felt like 3 enemies attacking at once. To the Americans, it was simply one conversation. German frustration. Interrogations of captured German Panzer crewmen reveal a consistent theme. They believed the Americans must have far more tanks than they actually did. Why? Because wherever Germans struck, Shermans reacted as though omnipresent. One platoon taking fire could immediately call another, unseen behind the next hedgerow. A Panther crew might think they were ambushing a single isolated tank, only to find 5 guns already swinging onto them. Distance meant nothing when radio erased distance. Meanwhile, many German vehicles, especially assault guns like the WWII, lacked transmitters entirely. Crews could listen, but not respond. Orders flowed down slowly. Information rarely flowed up. Initiative suffocated. When a commander was knocked out, the net often died with him. Leadership with a headset, American officers did not fight from map tables miles away. They leaned into the interphone, listening to the fear, urgency, and confidence in their crew's voices. They weren't just commanders, they were coordinators. This encouraged a habit the Germans noticed. U.S. junior officers took bold action. A sergeant who heard Allied infantry in trouble didn't wait for stars and eagles to weigh in. He changed the plan himself, warning nearby tanks, shifting fire, and calling air or artillery support through his radio. To German command structures, built on hierarchy and strict control, it looked reckless. In practice, it won battles. Radios shaped the rhythm as the Allies broke out from Normandy in July and August 1944. Speed became the defining feature of American warfare. Sherman sprinted across France, their radios chattering non-stop. A company might be fighting in one village at dawn and launching into another by dusk. The German army, forced to retreat and regroup constantly, relied on couriers, signals troops laying phone lines under fire and inconsistent wireless transmissions. Tankers often went hours with no updates, fighting ghosts instead of actual threats. US FM networks prevented those ghosts. Battles gained momentum. The moment a Panther was spotted, the entire unit knew the moment a road was blocked. Engineers were sent the moment an opportunity opened. Troops exploited it. War became fluid for the side that could talk. A hidden dominance on paper, many German tanks still looked superior. Their armor thicker, their guns longer and more lethal, their reputations terrifying, but a Panther with no information could be flanked. A Tiger with no coordination could be isolated, and an ambush that wasn't communicated was just good luck that rarely lasted. The less Germany spoke, the more America dictated. As the Allies pushed eastward, the question shifted from whether. Radios helped to how they shaped every decision. Sherman had become the center of a growing communications web, one that would soon be tested against large-scale German counterattacks desperate to turn the tide back. To see what this meant on the ground, we need to change the angle several times. The human advantage inside a Sherman tank, the world was noise and steel. The engine pumped heat into the cramped chamber. The gun breech clanged. Shell cases rolled under boots. The commander strained to see through a narrow periscope, searching for something, anything that might kill his crew before they ever saw it. But through the interphone, he heard his crew. Real voices. Real-time clarity. Gunner front. Loader AP. Driver halt. There was no need to shout. No need to gesture wildly in the darkness of the turret. The radio kept fear in check. It turned a sealed iron box into a team. For a gunner, a clean command meant fractions of a second saved in target acquisition. For a loader, it meant knowing exactly what shell was needed next. For a driver, eyes forward, barely seeing, it meant understanding the fight happening above his head. It wasn't just communication, it was confidence. Veterans later described how silence felt deadly. A net gone quiet meant a tank destroyed. But as long as voices flowed, clear, clipped, professional, hope stayed alive inside the armor. FM wasn't merely a technical upgrade. It was psychological armor. A reminder that you were not fighting alone, and when humans could trust their own network, trust transformed into tactics. The tactical Tempo A tank platoon rarely wins by brute force. It wins by speed of decision, and speed depends on how quickly context becomes command. With FM radios, American platoons turned encounters into coordinated maneuvers. One Sherman takes contact on a crossroads. Spotting report called instantly across the net. The flank section halts and pivots. Artillery battery alerted by a battalion net. Infantry warned to prepare for armor threats. Smoke rounds arrive within minutes without this chain. Tanks react individually, left guessing, right outflanked. With the chain, they shaped the engagement. German accounts describe watching U.S. units reposition as if reacting to invisible threats. There was no pause. No hesitation. Shermans did not need to wait for runners or flags. They simply turned their radios up. In hedgerow country, the ability to swing a platoon from travel formation to firing line in seconds made ambushes fail. What should have been German advantage terrain became neutral, sometimes even reversed. Control of tempo meant control of fire. Control of fire meant control of fate. But how did technology make such rapid behavior possible? The technological leap FM radio might sound like a small detail in a global war of millions. But technically, it was a revolution inside a tank. Amplitude modulation, AM, used by most German sets, struggled against. Engine ignition noise, electrical arcing inside steel hulls, atmospheric interference, signal reflections in hills and hedgerows. The result, hissing, crackling, garbled words, especially in motion. Frequency modulation, FM, used by the US, dramatically reduced these distortions. A strong FM signal either delivered clear voice or dropped entirely. No halfway ghost speech. In close, broken terrain, that binary clarity was priceless. The SCR 508 and related sets offered faster tuning between preset channels, better signal stability while moving, constant inter-tank coordination within platoons, reliable battalion communications inside. The tank, the interphone system tied every role together. The driver could hear the commander. The commander could speak to higher command. Everyone fought the same fight, not 5 separate ones. German crews, often equipped with only a receiver, could hear, but not respond. Communication flowed down a narrow pipe, never up or sideways. Technology dictated teamwork. Teamwork dictated victory, but American clarity didn't exist in a vacuum. Every weapon has an enemy, and this advantage looked very different through a German periscope. FM radios gave U.S. tankers a human edge, a tactical edge, a technological edge. To fully see the imbalance, we must now listen to the enemy struggling against silence. The enemy in the static to German tank crews, U.S. armored operations often felt unfair. They would strike with precision, an ambush set, a Sherman caught unaware. Yet that first success rarely multiplied. By the time they reloaded, the entire battlefield seemed to respond. Their own radios betrayed them. Most German armored vehicles carried low-band AM sets like the Few G5. On a clear day in open-steppe terrain, these radios were adequate. But in France, hedgerows swallowed signals, hills reflected transmissions, engines created a storm of electrical interference. Worse still, many German vehicles, especially Stoogie 3 assault guns, were equipped only with receivers. They could listen to orders, not contribute intelligence. If a unit saw something vital, they yelled in the turret, waved flags, or simply hoped their commander was looking the same direction. When the commander died, the radio net died with him. German reports accused the Americans of having unfair numbers. They estimated entire companies where U.S. maps show only a handful of tanks. Radios had become illusionists, multiplying combat power through pure coordination. One interrogated German panzer officer put it bluntly. When we hit one, 3 more were already hunting us. For a force that once prided itself on blitzkrieg coordination, the reversal was painful. Germany wasn't just being outgunned, it was being outcommunicated. And on the U.S. side, leaders embraced the power that came with every clear transmission. Leadership in real-time American armored doctrine empowered initiative. Junior officers didn't simply wait for headquarters. They acted as information hubs. The radio turned a lieutenant into a battlefield director. He could inform battalion of enemy armor strength, pull nearby platoons without bureaucratic delay, call artillery by coordinates within moments, synchronize infantry and engineers before a breach. This was decision-making at the speed of sound. German command structures were heavier, cleaving tightly to top-down orders. Brilliant officers existed at every level, but without quick communication support, even brilliance stalled. The Americans, meanwhile, treated leadership as an active verb. Hear, decide, act. That pace forced German forces into a reactive posture. Even when they planned well, Radio lag could turn preparation into failure. American officers often said, "If you're waiting for permission, you're already late." FM radios didn't create courage or intelligence, but they amplified both. Leadership grew sharper, and the sharper it grew, the more devastating the impact of every fire mission. Yet power is never neutral. The faster information moves, the faster death can follow. The moral edge of clarity radios not only accelerated victory, they accelerated violence. A Sherman platoon that spotted infantry in the open could call artillery in minutes. A machine gun nest that fired once might be erased before its smoke cleared. A tiger that dared show its flank could be marked and hunted by units it never saw. Was this advantage humane, by ending battles faster? Or brutal, by eliminating retreat before it could begin? The U.S. military framed it as saving lives. Stop the threat now, or more Americans die later. The Germans saw an enemy that seemed to always know exactly when to strike, exactly where to surround. They called it radio warfare. Every war weapon has a moral cost. But the ethics here were hidden, pressed against the head under a steel helmet, triggered by a whisper. Fire mission inbound. Flank right now. Target destroyed. Speed made killing emotionally distant. Precision made it easy to justify. Yet in war, moral debate rarely stops the clock. Soon, radios would decide not just skirmishes, but the fate of major operations. Where victory's margin would be counted not in armor thickness or muzzle velocity, but in seconds. Seconds that would determine whether a field in Lorraine became a graveyard of American steel, or a landmark of American tactical supremacy. And that brings us to the moment everything was tested. A battlefield where clarity met fire. The Battle of Arracourt, September 1944. The morning fog of Lorraine hung thick and white, swallowing shapes whole. Visibility collapsed to mere meters. A tank could be a ghost 10 yards away. Sound arrived without direction. Engines rumbled like thunder inside a cloud. Germany sensed an opportunity. Hitler demanded a counter-offensive to halt Patton's rapid advance toward the German border. The 5th Panzer Army, including experienced crews and newly arrived Panther tanks, was thrown into the mist to break American armor. Around the small French village of Arracourt, the Panthers carried formidable guns, long 75mm cannons capable of killing a Sherman, before the American crew even saw the threat. They were newer, heavier, and in theory, deadlier. But German crews lacked something else, knowledge of the American positions. Their radios, already stressed by the fog's signal distortion, struggled to coordinate movements. Many Panther commanders advanced with only rough ideas of where they would find the enemy. Lost in the mist at dawn on September 19th, German tank units rolled from the east. The fog worked in their favor at first. They slipped close to American positions without being spotted visually. The U.S. 4th Armored Division waited, unsure of the exact direction of the German attack, but certain it was coming. Their line was spread across undulating farmland, orchards, and narrow roads leading into Arracourt. Inside a Sherman, the commander lifted his radio handset. The net wasn't panicked. It wasn't confused. It was calm. "This is Red One, hearing armor movement east of the ridge. Sounds heavy." Within seconds, every platoon in hearing range knew the same thing. German tanks had no such shared awareness. A single Panther pushed ahead, eager to find the Americans. It found them, but not alone. Because when it fired, when its presence was confirmed, those few seconds of radio silence on the German side were met by a chorus of American responses. Coordinates passed instantly. Turrets swung to the threat. Artillery net was notified. The fog that should have favored Germany suddenly favored those who could speak through it. The first shots a Panther broke through a hedgerow, black silhouette barely visible in the pearly haze. Its commander raised binoculars, too late. A Sherman platoon already had bearings. The Americans fired first. A white-hot burst from a 76mm barrel. Hit. The Panther recoiled and burned. Moments later, more German armor emerged, confused, disoriented, still trying to identify enemy positions. They lacked the clarity needed for coordinated attack. U.S. tank commanders called out rapid updates. 2 Panthers, right flank. Infantry in support. Shift grid, fire mission pending. Artillery replies crackled back, "Shot! Over! Splash! Over!" And then the earth erupted. Information becomes firepower. Each engagement followed the same rhythm. Sound or sighting detected report, transmitted across. FM net platoons pivoted to intercept indirect fire arrived within minutes. German assault ground to a halt. The battlefield looked chaotic, but to American tankers, the radio map was precise. Where friendly units stood, which direction to cover, where artillery would fall, when to press forward, German armor pushed again and again. But with poor communication, they attacked in piecemeal waves, rather than as a unified spear. One Panther platoon advanced. Unaware, a partner platoon had stalled in the mist behind them. The Americans knew both situations instantly and crushed the isolated vanguard. Leadership with Bandwidth Cole Creighton Abrams, whose name would later grace the M1 Abrams tank, commanded elements of the 37th Tank Battalion here. His voice moved across the net like a conductor of steel, warning one flank, reinforcing another, calling artillery on threats no one could see yet, where the Germans saw only fog. U.S. commanders saw opportunity. The ability to redirect armor mid-battle was a luxury Germany no longer possessed. Their tankers operated blind, sometimes driving directly past hidden American positions simply because they hadn't heard warnings in time. In one sector, a Panther barrage forced Shermans to pull back momentarily. But instead of retreating into confusion, the platoon reported coordinates, shifted position together by radio, and attacked from a new angle within minutes. The Panthers, receiving delayed or unclear orders, remained pointed where the Shermans used to be. By the time German units adapted, the battlefield had already changed. Midday crisis as hours passed. Panthers continued to appear from the east, some in groups, some alone, often unaware of what lay directly ahead. They were hunting an enemy that always seemed to know more than they did. An American tank commander looked around the fog-thick field. He saw only white emptiness, but heard everything. Which units needed help? Which direction held danger when to conserve ammunition? When to surge, radio net discipline turned the invisible into the intelligible. More German tanks died. The fog glowed orange with burning gasoline, but the German command was not done. Reinforcements moved up. The attack widened. Arracourt was still in jeopardy. The Americans had won the morning. The afternoon would decide if clarity could outrun mass. The next wave would decide everything. The fog lifted slightly by midday. Not enough to see far, but just enough for silhouettes to take shape. Hulking forms crawling from the eastern ridges. More German tanks were coming. Fresh Panthers rolled forward, accompanied by Panzer Grenadier infantry and self-propelled guns. They pushed aggressively, determined to overwhelm the thin U.S. armored screens around Arracourt. Their commanders, finally aware of American resistance, tried to coordinate better, but communication still lagged several fatal beats behind reality. Every German tank destroyed in the morning had been a warning shot. This was the real attack. The American reaction, instant and integrated Sherman commanders didn't wait to guess. They radioed, and the battlefield network came alive. Armor breakthrough, grid 268, multiple Panthers. Need TD support. Within moments, M18 Hellcats, the U.S. tank destroyers, repositioned with frightening speed. Lightly armored but fast, they darted into flanking spots while Sherman platoons fixed German attention from the front. Infantry officers, overhearing tank nets through liaison radios, prepared their bazooka teams. Artillery units, already warmed up from the morning's firing, adjusted tubes by a few degrees. No generals needed to redraw maps. No messengers needed to sprint under fire. Every maneuver was spoken into existence. German frustration turned to desperation. Panther commanders saw Shermans appear, vanish, then reappear on a different flank. They attempted to call it in, but static cut their words apart. Orders misheard became orders delayed. That delay was death. Several German platoons advanced without knowing neighboring units had already stalled. Two Panthers crested a slight rise near Leasy and drove straight into the waiting sights of Hellcats guided there by radio cues. Both Panthers erupted, smoke boiling through the thinning mist. Their wingmen had no idea they were gone. Firepower multiplied through information to German crews. The Americans seemed unnaturally present. To Americans, they were simply informed. Each new enemy sighting fed into the same calm network. At least 4 more. Hull down. Bearing 315. Copy. Shifting fire. Artillery inbound. Danger close. Keep heads down. Artillery shells shrieked overhead, landing where German armor clustered, often before those tanks even knew they'd been spotted. U.S. forward observers, patched into armored nets, didn't require elaborate relay chains. One radio call, and explosive steel fell from the sky. A Panther's armor could withstand many hits. It could not withstand being surrounded on a map it could not see. The turning point, coordination versus confusion. By late afternoon, the fog began to burn away in patches. Visibility grew, and with it, American dominance intensified. Now Shermans could see as clearly as they could talk. Panther crews finally identified threats, but too late. Overshadowed by smoke columns from burning German tanks, the battlefield became a gallery of ruined silhouettes. More Panthers tried to press the attack, only to be cut off by crossfires directed over radio. Infantry support faltered, leader casualties mounting under artillery barrages they couldn't predict. One German officer later recalled, "We were always arriving 1 minute after the Americans had already decided the engagement." Those minutes were purchased with FM clarity. The German collapse as the sun dipped behind low clouds. The counterattack crumbled. Scattered German units withdrew east, engines screaming in full reverse. Panthers left behind tried to act as rearguards but were hunted down, an American tank destroyer receiving bearings, a Sherman platoon boxing in the target, a final radio call, fire when ready, steel cracked. Flames rose. The advance was finished. For the 5th Panzer Army, Arracourt was intended to be a blow that would stop Patton in his tracks. Instead, it became a brutal lesson in modern armored warfare. Power was no longer measured in gun calibers alone. It was measured in information delivered in real time. Crews hear the victory before they see it. Smoke drifted slowly over the fields. Wrecked Panthers hissed as fire reached ammunition racks. U.S. crews emerged from hatches, sweat-streaked, ears ringing, still listening to the net. "Good shooting, Red! Hold positions!" Ammo check. Fuel check. Prepare for night watch. Voices remained steady, professional, even after surviving one of the largest tank-on-tank battles the U.S. Army would fight in Europe. Radios crackled quietly. Not frantic, not fearful, just connected. That connection had turned a handful of American tanks, outgunned on paper, into a synchronized machine that shattered a superior armored force. Germany realizes, too. Late post-battle analysis stunned German commanders. Their newest tanks had been neutralized, their skilled crews lost, their offensive momentum gone. The shocking factor was not Allied numbers. It was Allied communication. The Panther's gun remained fearsome. Its armor still thick. Its silhouette still terrifying. But a weapon without coordination is just metal. A tank without communication is just a target. And at Arracourt, clarity itself had won the day. The battlefield fell quiet. Yet its consequences were only beginning to take shape. Effects that would ripple through entire divisions, into strategy, into morale, and into the future of armored warfare. The fields around Arracourt smoldered for days. Charred Panthers leaned at awkward angles in the grass, turrets frozen mid-turn. The ground was pocked with shell craters, small valleys where artillery had erased German momentum. Buzzing flies floated over burnt rubber and scorched steel. Though battered and bruised, American tankers knew this was a landmark. They had not merely survived a German armored assault, they had defeated it. A lopsided tally during the broader Arracourt engagements from September 18 to 29. 1944, U.S. forces destroyed or disabled over 80 German tanks, many of them brand new Panthers. In return, the 4th Armored Division lost fewer than 30 armored vehicles in the same period. Statisticians and historians have argued over the exact counts, as they do in every chaotic battle, but the story remains consistent. The Germans brought more lethal tanks. The Americans brought better communication. And on battlefields where seeing the enemy first meant surviving, information became armor. An army takes notice after the fighting. U.S. after-action reports repeatedly highlighted the same theme. The radios worked. Coordination was lightning fast. The fog that should have been a German advantage instead became a canvas for American radio discipline. Officers praised net reliability under movement, rapid call and response fire missions, seamless tank artillery coordination, quick reinforcement routing 1. Report from WWII Corps summarized the battle bluntly. Success was due to superior tactical coordination, facilitated by reliable FM radio communications. In other words, they didn't see themselves as lucky. They saw themselves as prepared. A psychological shift. Before Arracourt, many Sherman crews carried the weight of reputation, the knowledge that German tanks were supposed to be better. Crews joked darkly about being in Ronsons, referencing the lighter brand slogan, "Light's first time." They knew a single Panther round could end them. But after Arracourt, something changed inside the voices on the net. Confidence. Sherman crews learned to trust their own maneuvering, their platoon mates to cover them, their artillery to listen and respond, their leadership to adapt instantly. They realized they could bring a German armored thrust to a halt, not by trading blows, but by shaping the fight before the Germans understood it. German confusion hardens into dread-captured panzer officers provided reports that read like frustration given form. They complained about absent coordination between their own units, orders arriving too slowly, assault waves broken apart by unforeseen American counterfire tank losses without knowing who killed them, or how one German signal officer wrote, "The Americans speak more quickly than we can act." Germany, once the exemplar of armored communication, now found itself trying to imitate a network it no longer had the time or industry to build. Tactical doctrine validated, Arracourt wasn't just a victory, it was proof. Proof that radios outranked armor thickness in importance. Situational awareness beat raw firepower initiative, when connected by radio, could outperform strict hierarchy. The U.S. Army had industrialized communication just as it industrialized everything else in the war. Radios were built by the hundreds of thousands, installed not just in tanks, but in jeeps, half-tracks, scout cars, artillery posts, air support coordination centers. The Sherman was the centerpiece, but the system was the real weapon. The war continues. But the lesson is learned. Arracourt did not end the war. Germany would launch desperate assaults through the Ardennes that December, the Battle of the Bulge. More American tankers would die in dark forests and snowy fields. But those tankers fought with an advantage the German army could no longer ignore, the advantage of connected minds inside armored hulls. And the U.S. command took every page of the Arracourt reports and turned them into broader strategy, one that now spread across entire corps and armies. Not just tank battalions. The consequences would influence not just the coming months, but the decades of armored thinking after the guns fell silent. Those pages of observations soon shaped policy, which leads us into how this battlefield victory became doctrine for the future. Arracourt became a lesson copied into notebooks, typed into manuals, and whispered into every armored schoolhouse from Fort Knox to the European front, not because of heroics alone, but because clear speech turned out to be a weapon. From battlefield success to formal doctrine, U.S. Army leadership recognized that radios had changed not only how tanks fought, but how wars would be commanded. Large-scale exercises and operations began emphasizing continuous information flow, decentralized initiative, rapid fire support integration, combined arms as a living dialogue. If a unit wasn't transmitting, it wasn't fighting. It was waiting to be destroyed. Training standards increased. Radio operators drilled relentlessly. Tank commanders were taught to think in seconds, not minutes. The message was simple. The first to communicate is the first to control. Germany's too late realization after Arracourt. German armored leaders conducted their own assessments. They understood the implications. Painfully late, they noted that their AM radios were technologically outmatched. Their command structures slowed response times. Their armored formations could no longer maneuver freely under fire. Junior officers lacked authority to exploit fleeting opportunities. The Germans still fielded deadly tanks. But battles are not decided by steel alone. They're decided by who knows what, and when, Even if Germany had the industry left to improve its radios, it no longer had the time. War is ruthless with deadlines. Allied air-ground synergy strengthens. American FM sets proved invaluable beyond tank duels. As the Allies pushed into Germany, the same nets cleared friendly lanes for fighter bombers, made danger-close artillery missions routine, enabled rapid pursuit of retreating forces air. Liaison officers didn't guess where friendly tanks were. They heard them. Infantry didn't struggle to locate armor support. They called them. Voice turned the battlefield into a team effort, not a collage of disconnected fights. Industrial superiority meets communication philosophy. The U.S. didn't stop with tanks. Radios multiplied like rivets. SCR 300 backpack sets for infantry. SCR 6 and 10 for vehicles and reconnaissance. SCR 522 linking aircraft to ground forces. Every part of the U.S. Army became a node on a growing web of awareness. When the war finally reached the Rhine, American units weren't guessing where bridges stood, where threats lurked, or where support was closest. They were synchronizing. Germany, once the master of rapid operational movement, now struggled to send messages faster than they were being overtaken on the ground. Post-war echoes. After 1945, both NATO and former German officers documented the same core finding. A tank's greatest strength is its ability to coordinate. FM radios, and the doctrine that empowered them, influenced every generation of armored warfare that followed. The U.S. M26 Pershing and later M48 and M60 integrated advanced intercoms and longer-range FM NATO standardized VHF-FM across armored units. Command philosophy shifted permanently toward decentralized. Decisions with centralized intent communications had become the true armor, protecting units by enabling superior decision-making. A silent army could never again hope to win a mechanized war beyond victory. Philosophical shift Arracourt proved that the strongest weapon is awareness. A commander who knows first decides first. A crew that hears first survives first. When historians look back at the Sherman, they often compare thickness of steel, penetration of guns, speed of engines. But those weren't the factors that won Arracourt. The real comparison was between signal versus static network versus noise, clarity versus confusion, and the battle's result answered which mattered more. The guns would eventually cool. The troops would march on. The radios would continue to whisper through exhaust fumes and mud-smeared helmets. Yet the deeper implications of what happened at Arracourt and in hundreds of lesser-known engagements linger far beyond. 1944, those implications lead us to a final reflection on how invisible signals quietly change the course of a brutal, visible war. War likes to pretend it is decided by the loudest machines, the cannons that thunder, the engines that roar, the steel that crashes against steel. But in places like Arracourt, victory traveled by whisper. Those short, disciplined bursts of voice over FM radio were never celebrated like tank armor or aircraft firepower. They were not photographed or praised in home front headlines. They didn't leave monuments behind or appear in newsreel glamour, yet they changed everything. Clarity became a weapon. Information became armor. Connection became survival. German tank crews never lacked courage. They never lacked machine quality, but at the moment of contact, when fear pressed against steel walls, they lacked understanding. They lacked the shared awareness that turns individuals into a team. The Sherman was not a perfect tank. Thousands of crews died inside its hull, but what it gave the U.S. Army was something beyond metallurgy and ballistics, a voice that carried farther than the enemy could comprehend. Every battle after Arracourt carried the same quiet lesson. Know your situation. Share what you know. Act before the enemy can respond. Simple principles. Devastating in practice. It is easy to count tanks. It is harder to count seconds. The brief moment when a commander hears what others do not. When a platoon pivots before the threat appears. When artillery fires before anyone has taken aim. Seconds won a war. Today, modern armored vehicles thrum with digital communication systems, satellites overhead linking entire armies in real time. The whisper has become a symphony, yet its origin, its proof of concept, lies back in the misty fields of Lorraine, among wrecked Panthers and tired Shermans.
Among crews who survived because they could hear their own heartbeat, and one another's, through a headset, a weapon with no shape.
A shield with no steel, just a clear voice in a world that punished silence.